Oh, you're muted, Brielle. Brielle, you're muted.
Sorry, if you hit live and you're unmuted, then you hear the terrible YouTube echo. So we're good to
go. Okay, great. Good afternoon, everyone. And no, I'm not Jed Liano. Jed could not make it today. He's in court. So at any rate, or has a court-related issue to handle today. So as Vice President, I'm filling in today. And so welcome to the San Gabriel Valley Regional Housing Trust Fund Board of Directors this Thursday, November 17th at 2 p.m. I'm calling the meeting to order at 2:03 p.m. And Brielle, before we get going, can you just give us a brief overview of the handling of our meeting this afternoon?
Yes, so we're meeting virtually via Zoom. Our board members and our presenters have been promoted to panelists. All of their staff or members of the public are attendees. We will take public comment on each item as it comes. So if you are a member of the public and would like to make public comment, please raise your hand and we will call on you.
Great. Then can we proceed with the roll call?
Yes, we can. Okay, Meredith, do you have that open? There we go. All right, Chair Liano is not here. Vice Chair Shevlin?
Here.
Director Andrade Stadler? Okay, Director Averill?
Here.
Director Boyer?
Here.
Director Cortez?
Here.
Director DeFrank?
Here.
Okay, and then Directors Finley and Morales were not able to join us today.
Okay, great. And then, thank you very much. Then we'll move on to public comment. And for this meeting, this is for items not on our agenda. Is that correct?
Correct. We did not receive any written requests, and let me check hands. We do not have any raised hands.
Okay, not seeing any requests for public comment. We will close that portion and we will move to changes of agenda order. Do we have any changes in our agenda? I'm not seeing any comments on that. So without having any changes, we will move on to our consent calendar, which are items 5 through 7, which can be taken all in one motion unless someone needs to pull an item. Do we have anyone needing to pull an item, or did we have public comment on any of these to pull an item? Okay, not seeing any then. Do we have a motion to approve items 5 through 7 on our consent calendar?
Move to approve, Boyer.
Okay. We have a second?
Second, Cortez.
Okay, we have a motion by Boyer, a second by Cortez. Can we please have a roll call vote?
Yes, we can. All right, Vice Chair Shevlin.
Yes.
Director Averill.
Yes.
Director Boyer.
Yes.
Director Cortez.
Yes.
Director DeFrank.
Yes.
Great.
Okay, and then thank you very much. And then moving on to action items, number 8, state budget earmark priorities. And I will turn that over to who's going to do this.
I'll be doing that one.
Okay, Brielle.
Great, thanks, Becky.
And before you start, did we have any public comment on this item?
No written public comment. I am looking at the attendee list and I don't see any raised hands.
Okay, great. So proceed.
All right. So the recommended action here is to adopt resolution 2228, adopting state budget earmark priorities. So this is for the $30 million state budget earmark that the trust received this year. So the recommended breakdown is $10 million for project pipeline capital, $6 million for the revolving loan fund, $4 million for innovative housing and homeless programs, and $10 million for San Gabriel Valley Land Trust Startup Capital. So I'm going to go into each of those items. And then for the land trust presentation, we also have our consultants here who presented last month. So they will also give additional detail on that item.
Great.
Okay, so first for the project pipeline capital, recommending $10 million to support shovel-ready projects. This type of funding has already supported 552 units previously across 10 projects. And so the guidelines here are readiness to close financing and begin construction within 12 months. Projects with city funding will receive additional points, and then a per unit funding maximum of 50,000 and overall funding request of $2.5 million per project, so we can spread the wealth and support more projects. This is a little bit higher than the 40,000 we had previously, and this will hopefully help to address those projects that have been coming back and asking for upward adjustments due to the increased price of development. And this allocation at this rate would provide financing for 200 or more units of affordable housing. The next item was the revolving loan fund, so $6 million to support acquisition and construction of affordable housing. This is important because the revolving loan fund, which we approved last year with $8 million to start it, is currently the only renewable funding source that the trust has. So loan repayments from this program are available, or once the loan's complete and they're repaid, they're available to be lent again to future projects. So this represents a ongoing funding source for the Housing Trust. So the revolving loan fund commitments that we made last month, those funds should be available in 2026 to lend to new projects. And so the RLF provides really pre-development and acquisition financing, which is often not an eligible use or might not be prioritized by other funding sources. So for programs like the local housing trust fund that we've utilized the past few years, there is a reduction in the score when you're going for an acquisition project, and you actually can't go for just an acquisition only project. It has to also have a construction component. And then to demonstrate how the fund has been used to date, so we've received 3 applications. The total for those 3 requests is $3.43 million. 2 of those projects were awarded last month for $1.33 million, and that pending application is for $2.1 million. And this would leave the remaining RLF funding, right, based on what we've awarded at $6.46 million, not including the pending application I mentioned. And then also we were in discussions with another city and are anticipating an application for the maximum funding available through the RLF, which is $4 million. So if we were to award the pending 2.1 and the one that we're anticipating, we'd basically deplete the revolving loan fund and have only 367,000 left. So I wanted to demonstrate the current demand and provide support for why we're trying to add funding now. And also the addition of funding here could provide an opportunity for the revolving loan fund to leverage private capital. There are other housing trusts and other revolving loan funds that include a component from a community development financial institution, a CDFI, to help leverage those dollars. And I am going to promote Mayor Estrada. So we will have one more person to add to our board. Hold. All right, and then I'm going to continue on. All right, so the other item here was $4 million to provide support for innovative housing solutions at a rate of $25,000 per bed or unit for programs operated for 2 or more years. So this program helped to support the development of Serenity Homes, which was 16 units or 50 beds of homeless housing for families in Baldwin Park. And so to expand on these efforts, we're requesting to add additional funding to this program and also expand the use a little bit, understanding that each city has different and unique needs to address their housing shortage and homelessness. And so some of those models could include motel conversion, master leasing, modular housing, non-congregate shelter like we've seen in Baldwin Park and Montebello, and then other alternative housing models that address the immediate housing needs of individuals experiencing homelessness. All right, and last up on that list is the land trust. So $10 million to create the land trust and support initial investment opportunities. And this is really exciting because the land trust represents a cost-effective and impactful way to develop housing. And what it really does is separates out the cost of the land from the improvements, which could be a multifamily or single family affordable unit on the land. And it provides an opportunity to increase the term of affordability, basically make the housing affordable in perpetuity. Also think that this is a really great opportunity because the land trust can become a self-sustaining financing vehicle. So this, like the revolving loan fund, is something that after an initial investment can begin to support itself. And the creation of a land trust could be another tool to the regional housing trust. So this can help support the revolving loan fund and other efforts that the trust is involved in. So adding to that tool belt. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Primrose Research Group and Land and Water Connections Consulting so they can share the results of their economic feasibility analysis. So we have Jessica and Amy here with us, and I have your slides ready. So just let me know when you need the next slide.
Great. Thank you so much for having me today. In this brief presentation, I'll be providing an overview of the economic analysis and some entity formation recommendations for the Community Land Trust. Next slide, please. So before I dive into the recommendations for the structure, I do want to highlight one simple thing. While I'm using the name, the San Gabriel Valley Regional Community Land Trust, there's actually already a San Gabriel Valley Community Land Trust that was incorporated in March of this year, which is all volunteer. So probably want to consider a more unique sounding name, but just for purposes of the conversation, wanted to keep it straightforward, but it's probably not going to be the ultimate name of the land trust. So the recommended structural elements are creating a 501c3 organization that initially shares a majority of its board with the Regional Housing Trust, and moving towards a more traditional board made up of equal thirds of people who live on the Community Land Trust owned land, community members, and Regional Housing Trust board members over time. Also recommending a geographic service area of the entire San Gabriel Valley. As a regional entity, the Community Land Trust could work at the scale that cities can't achieve alone. And the Community Land Trust would be responsive to the needs of member cities, and projects would align closely with those city priorities to produce affordable housing. That is, it would be more responsive to local needs and less prescriptive than a countywide entity. Next slide, please. So the creation of the Community Land Trust would enable the Regional Housing Trust to support projects that might not otherwise be feasible given existing affordable housing sources, maintain that long-term affordability, and create a sustainable funding source. We anticipate that the Community Land Trust would fund about 70% acquisition and rehabilitation projects to meet that unmet need to preserve housing affordability in the existing stock, which is not supported by other funding sources, as Brielle mentioned, like the Local Housing Trust Fund. This focus would enable the organization to produce units at a lower cost per unit than new construction and further leverage the Regional Housing Trust resources. A 30% focus on new construction efforts would complement other sources of affordable housing funding and support the development of additional units. The Community Land Trust investments can be paired with the revolving loan fund and other Regional Housing Trust loan products. The Community Land Trust itself would be another tool for the region to meet its housing goals and an opportunity to maintain local control by acquiring properties that the county or state agencies could target. As previously mentioned, we're recommending an investment of $10 million in the Community Land Trust, again, with 70% of those funds for the acquisition and rehabilitation of existing affordable housing and 30% for new construction. The administrative expenses to support the formation and early operation of the Community Land Trust would be included in this allocation. And now I'm going to walk you through the likely impact of that funding structure based on some historical averages. Thank you. So according to research by the California Housing Partnership, in 2021, the median total cost for acquisition and rehabilitation of an affordable home was just over $377,000 per unit. The cost to purchase the land and the buildings, as shown as the darkest blue in this chart, are the highest and largest category of cost. As previously mentioned, there's a gap in the acquisition, rehabilitation, and preservation of existing affordable housing that the Community Land Trust could really help to fill. Some of the advantages of this approach would be the lower cost per unit relative to new development, the shorter lead times, and the protection of existing use. Next slide, please. Historically, developers, even with the rehabilitation and acquisition, have relied on an array of funding sources. In Los Angeles County, developers of affordable rental housing employ an average of 6 funding sources, although some might need to rely on more. The cost of securing funding from those multiple sources adds up over time. And a 2020 analysis by the California Housing Partnership revealed that each additional state funding source required in the financing added $15,800 per unit in total development costs on average. And this graphic is showing the types of those 6 funding sources and how they historically have been allocated across projects. Next slide. So using those factors and acknowledging there are many factors that go into affordable housing costs, these figures are an illustration based on those averages for project costs and sources of funding. Assuming a much more conservative 50% match, an initial investment of $7 million in multifamily acquisition and rehabilitation could yield around 35 units. And you see that towards the middle of this table in bold. And these units would generate $574,000 in annual rental income, assuming an average rent of $1,376. And that estimate is based on capping rent to 30% of income for a 4-person household at 60% AMI for Los Angeles County. That rental income could be used by the Community Land Trust for property maintenance, management, debt repayment, and CLT operations. These figures are rough estimates. The total number of units preserved would be dependent on the availability of Community Land Trust staff support, funding sources and their associated requirements, the ability to generate matching funds, and community support, which I don't think I'm telling any of you anything you don't already know. Next slide. So moving on to new development project costs, as you can see, the 2021 median total new construction costs per unit are higher at just over $578,000 per unit. Construction costs make up the majority of these development costs, with land making up around 6% of total costs, which is the darkest green at the bottom of the chart. Next slide, please. Historically, the low-income housing tax credit equity made up the largest portion of funding for new construction at around 42%, but it also relies on multiple sources of funding. Next slide. Incorporating the many factors that go into affordable housing for new development based on historical averages, the cost of land being at that 6% of total development costs. And here, assuming no matching funds, which is likely to be an underestimate, Community Land Trust investment of $2.4 million in the land could provide sufficient acreage for a separate affordable housing developer to create roughly 65 units financed separately. Assuming, and that you'll see in the center of the table, and assuming a ground lease fee of $100 per unit, $6,500 would be generated for the Community Land Trust annually, and that could be used for monitoring affordability and the Community Land Trust operations. Again, these are rough figures. As with rehabilitation, the total number of units created would depend on availability of staffing support, funding and associated requirements, ability to garner matching funding, and community support. Those are the cost considerations. If approved, the next step would be to form the community land trust. The task to form the land trust would include applying for IRS 501c3 status, establishing the board, which I've already mentioned. We're recommending, at least initially, reflect the Regional Housing Trust Board, preparing associated documents establishing the land trust, institutionalizing its structure and governance, and designing the ground lease, including affordability restrictions and income requirements for tenants, and the resale formula. Next slide, please. Once the community land trust is formed, the startup tasks would include things like developing the real estate portfolio, outreach and coordination to stakeholders, potential partners, financial institutions, municipalities, fundraising, etc. Next slide, please. The early growth phase would be the next phase for the community land trust, and these tasks would really expand into the realm of projects, including facilitating transactions, managing contractors, collecting lease fees, etc. So those are our recommendations today, and I'm happy to take your questions.
Great. Do we have any questions of staff or Jessica? I'm not seeing any. And so what I'm looking here, what is our?
Gary's raising his
Oh,
hand.
I'm sorry. Did not see your hand, Gary.
That's okay.
Go
Hey,
ahead.
a couple of questions. When we acquire the land and we transfer it, are we still retaining any type of ownership, or is it completely out of our hands at that point?
The community land trust will retain the ownership of the land, and they would charge a ground lease fee for the owner if or operator of the structure on that land. And the reason why I hesitate there is a community land trust could itself manage the rental housing, or could sell the rental housing and maintain the land underneath that rental housing and charge a lease fee to the purchaser of the rental housing.
Okay, so my question then is, what type of liability does that create for us? Would it create for the land trust?
The ownership of the land.
Yes.
I think that would be important in the document setting up the land trust to, if not completely eliminate liability, to minimize it. And that is why.
Jessica, possibly Mr. DeBerry could address that. David, do you have any comments on that?
Yes, so in the scenario where we're ground leasing the land to a developer, in that particular case, all that liability would be shifted to the developer. We'd require defense and indemnity. One of the things we would do whenever we would acquire property would be to do some kind of phase one environmental review of the property, because as the landowner, we would be responsible for any contamination on the site. But yeah, once if we have we're actually in the scenario where we're just ground leasing to a developer, and that developer is owning and operating the facility, we would require insurance, defense and indemnity, and those types of things.
Okay, so a couple of my concerns are, first off, there's a scenario in which a developer were to come in, we go into a partnership with this, and the project not be completed. That would be a concern, and I'm just not sure what that would we then be required to complete the project? Because I would guess that the land would have some sort of stipulation on it as to what it needs to be used for, and under a time frame and everything. And then the second, would be, what if a project was completed and for some reason or another, whoever owned the project or whoever was managing the project failed, and it would come back to us. Would we have responsibility for debt, or would any debtors have an ability to come back and hold us liable for any debt?
Jessica, you want to take a shot at that, or Brielle?
Yeah, I'll jump in first if that's okay. So the ground lease would actually be part of the financing, like layer cake, right? That would make the project possible. So you would have your ground lease, you would have your construction loan, which would probably be from a larger bank. These projects could have tax credits or other county or other subordinate funding sources. So kind of step one to getting it complete would be making sure title is set up for all of those financing entities. And, you know, we could require a payment and performance bond. We could require other sort of legal remedies to make sure that the project was completed, or that we were made whole if the project was not made complete. And I think on the second scenario, where the project's built but isn't operated well, if we would definitely have provisions in our loan agreements where we could either transfer the property to someone who could operate it or purchase it. But David, go ahead and add more backup and support.
Yeah, I think these are potential issues with respect to a lot of affordable housing projects. So typically, and let's just take Habitat for Humanity as one example. When they provide assistance for affordable housing, there's a ton of different covenants that go along with the land, including if it's a for rent property, or even if it's an ownership property. There's a lot of covenants about maintenance, operation, and those types of things. And it would give us, in this particular case, the ability to take the land back or take over ownership, or perhaps put in a new owner. I think in those scenarios, Brielle referenced them, where a project gets halfway done, would be, in a lot of ways, it would be like a public works project, for instance. So, you know, there's always a chance that a contractor can go BK, or for some reason it doesn't finish the job or walks off. So we would want to have performance and payment bonds. And at that point in time, we could bring somebody else in to complete the project, or we could try and complete it ourselves. So all those things will have to be built in the agreement between us as a landowner and whoever is going to develop the property or rehabilitate the property and then operate it. And I'll ask Jessica, you may have the answer, or Brielle, you may have the answer to this question. When these developers come in and either rehab a property or build a new development, and they themselves have to get loans, we do not allow the land to be used as security for the loans, correct? Because we'd be owning the land, and we would not want the developer to be using that as security for any of the loan documents or any of the loans they get.
Yes, the land would be separated
Right.
legally from, yes. They would hold a lease only.
Okay, so I guess a question I would have is there an advantage to us holding the land, or is there an avenue in which we could possibly transfer the land? The one scenario we talked about, $6,500. I wasn't sure if that was a month or a year in land lease cost. Would there be a possibility of us doing something and sort of like carrying the paper, but selling the land over a 55-year period or something to help alleviate any liability? My concern would be that because projects fail, things do happen. And if a big enough project were to fail at the wrong time, I would be concerned as to what that might do to our overall land trust. If we got into this and we ended up with a number of properties, could it affect other things that we're trying to do? That's my only concern. And just so you know, I'm in real estate in the private sector, so I know this is a little bit different, but these things happen, and so it always have to question things.
Yeah, I can take a stab at that, but you're right. The public sector is not beyond the risks that sometimes are, involved with the private sector. So in the ground lease scenario, you would have somebody that, in theory anyway, is coming on and improving your property. So as soon as that development is on the property, even if it fails at a later date, you still have the underlying land. So it's still, that land is going to increase in value. And in theory, at least, if you now have a development on the property, you also have that increase in value as well. So I don't see that as a financial liability so much as just, are we getting the development that we hope for? Are we getting the affordable housing project? But let's say in a scenario where we did have affordable housing development was up and operating, and then for whatever reason the operator went BK, the land and the development would come back to the land trust, and we would just get a new operator in there, and we would have a more valuable piece of land, frankly.
I also just wanted to add that today we're seeking approval to form the entity and kind of take those first steps, but the loan documents and kind of the ways in which we would take down land and provide the kind of security that Gary's talking about, that would come back to the board before we purchased anything. And we actually have the Harrison Associates team on, and they've been our loan document partners. So if we do have any more kind of loan document questions, they can hop into.
Okay, I appreciate it. Thanks.
Gary, is that satisfactory then? Do you need any further clarification?
Well, again, I understand that we're making the decision to move forward with this. I just think it's important for everybody to understand there are some risks involved.
Yes, and yes.
My worst case scenario would be not that a project is finished and running and failed. It would be if you got a project that's 75% completed and a developer or a contractor were to fail and we can't get funding to complete the project, that land, the value of that land is dramatically reduced because now you have to demo something to start over and everything. So you have liability involved in it. It's an issue. I just think it's important that we understand that we got to make sure we cover those types of things.
Always good to ask questions, but I would think in that particular situation, and Mr. DeBerry or anyone else can correct me on this, that if we have the proper performance bonds placed, that would protect us. I don't know if it's always 100%, but that would protect us if the proper performance bonds were in place on each of these projects. Is that correct?
It would be a layer of protection. So we could call on the surety on the performance bond to complete the project. But to be very honest and frank, when you do call on the sureties to perform under the performance bond, there has an intent to do so. So sometimes that even involves litigating against the surety of the performance bond. But that's why they're there, right? That's why the performance bonds are there, to ensure completion of the project.
Right.
And I think you said this. I just want to clarify. I think you have, those are great questions. The real kindness of this, but it's really, I think it's better to think of us as like a funder, or we're funding the project by reducing the cost by having the land, but we're not really like responsible for the project. So if they get funding and like fail to do something and then they're having a problem with LACTA or whoever, that's really, we're just an additional funding source, but LACTA isn't going to come to us and say, why didn't you finish this project? It's really on the developer. I totally agree that if they 75% build a project, we own land that has a 75, that's a challenge, but it is a little bit different than thinking about like, we're the developer of the project and we have a responsibility to build it because we're just helping reduce the cost.
But that brings up another question. The funding that we receive in order to acquire land, I would guess that there are ties to that that would require a completed project at some point.
So we're using the earmark funding to start that, and we're just like another source layering into the project. We're not getting a different source of funding at this point to do the land trust.
Oh, okay,
they're bringing in the other sources, not us. The developer would be bringing in the additional sources to do the project.
Okay, but the funds that we get to originally acquire the property.
It's
Are
earmarked,
there,
just the earmark.
okay, but it would be earmarked towards a affordable housing project.
And we would still be in compliance because we purchased the land with the intention of continuing to trying to develop the project. So even if, let's say, that project gets stalled, we have to wait, we have to demo, we have to do something, like, we're still in line with the intent of the earmark because we're still working to use that to develop affordable housing. Even if we were to have to tear down the project, sell that, and then reuse that money, we're not using the money for a purpose not related to affordable housing. But the way our earmark is structured, it's not saying you're going to develop this project of 30 units on this property.
Okay, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Great, always good questions, and it's so much better to ask. So thanks
Did you
very
put
much.
back to the recommendation? Sorry, Real, just so it's
Yeah.
confusing.
There is, yes, our recommendation today is to adopt resolution 22-28, adopting state earmark funding priorities. And I just have to ask, Marissa, that other 10 million that had been brought up, is there any clarification on that?
It's the 30 million. There was just confusion in the way. that they
Okay,
did it.
all right, great. So that's been put to bed. Okay, so we are adopting the resolution, and as outlined there, do we have, I believe I already asked for public comment, but I'll ask again just to be on the safe side. Was there any public comment on this item?
Did not receive any written public comment. I'm looking at hands and I do not see any.
Okay, great. Well, then, outside of any further discussion on this, do we have a motion to approve, adopt resolution 22-28?
I make a motion to approve.
And who's that? I'm sorry, I didn't.
This is
Carol?
Carol, yeah.
Carol, thank you, Carol.
And Boyer, I'll second it.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Can we please have roll call?
Yes, we can. All right, Vice Chair Shevlin.
Yes.
Okay, Director Averill.
Yes.
Director Boyer.
Yes.
Director Cortez.
Yes.
Director DeFrank.
Yes.
Okay, and then in place of Director Morales, Director Estrada.
Yes.
Great, thank you.
Thank you very much. And again, always great to have a good conversation and questions and discuss things fully. So thank you very much, Gary. So we are now moving on to our update items. Chair's report, obviously Jed's not here, but I will mention that we attended the Sangerville Valley Economic Partnership, and we were co-host on that for the Housing Summit that occurred yesterday. And I mean, I'm a little prejudiced, but I think our presentation regarding the Regional Housing Trust was one of the best ones in terms of options and solutions. So many times these summits are full of, they identify the problem very well, but they're short on options to do anything to correct a situation. So I really think overall I thought it was good, but I really liked our segment on Regional Housing Trust. And Marissa, did you have anything to add to that?
No, I just have my report. Oh, there we
Okay.
go.
All right, so I will, was there any public comment request for public comment on any of the update items, Brielle?
No, there was not.
Okay, great. Okay, then we will move on to the executive director's report.
Sure. So I just have a couple of items. We will have our, Braille just sent out the calendar appointment earlier today for our December meeting. We had mentioned that we were going to plan to have that before the LACTA NOFA, which is due December 15th. So it's scheduled right now for December 13th to accommodate any requests that come in for that. And additionally, we will have our quarterly financial report. Those are the two primary items that we anticipate going on the December agenda. And then I did want to update all of you. I know there's several of you that are on SCAG, CHD, or Regional Council, and you heard about REAP 2.0. So we hope that that is a great opportunity to get additional funding for the housing trust because the focus is on supporting additional housing. So we've met and there's a special section of funding that is for housing trusts that are being formed or are formed. So we have been working on that actively and we will give you more updates. It's still in a very, while the applications are out, they're still meeting individually with applicants to kind of work through what a successful application would look like. So we've been talking to them, but I did want to let you know we are on top of that. And then I think we have one more slide, right, Brielle? Yes, so something very exciting. The COG staff holiday party is actually going to be a holiday party at Serenity Home. So we're going to be putting on an event for the families on the 22nd of December, so Thursday. So we just wanted to provide this opportunity. If any of you would like to participate by either sponsoring a family, we're getting wish lists right now from the 13 families that live there. So if you're interested in sponsoring one of the families and buying the presents for them or items off of the wish list, we would really love it if you could do that. And if you just want to get a gift card, you can also do that. And you can either do it electronically or bring it and show it to our new office, which still some boxes. Don't be scared if you come in, but the new office is in Monrovia. But yes, we would love, we're really, really excited about this opportunity. We're going to be doing crafts. We are trying to wrangle up a Santa to come to the event. So we're really looking forward to it.
So when is the actual event?
The Thursday, the 22nd.
Okay,
Yeah, it'll be at from 5 p.m. to 8 p.m. We're doing it to accommodate a lot of the parents work during the day. So we're doing it at night. And so we're going to have a dinner service and then we're going to have all kinds of crafts, activities, hot chocolate, movie. And like I said, trying to get a Santa. Haven't gotten one yet, but working on it.
and that is actually at the site.
At the site.
Okay, great. Okay, then General Counsel's report, Mr. DeBerry.
Nothing from me.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. And then now we have no further items under our regular agenda, and we are going to then now we're going to close and enter into our closed session. We aren't formally adjourning yet.
Right.
We
So
are
right now,
recessing to our
Yes.
closed session. And so how are we facilitating this, Brielle?
yes, so I'm going